My husband drained our account, forged my name on a $40,000 loan, and left divorce papers on the kitchen table, like a grocery list. His little sister. She was in my bathrobe on our security cam, smiling. I was making him coffee while they planned it all. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, I'm done being the fool. Daniel insisted that Daniela move in just until she found her footing. He said it with that cloying charm he used every time he wanted something to sound noble. I remember nodding, telling him I trusted him completely. He kissed my forehead and slipped his mother's wedding ring onto my finger, saying it symbolized loyalty. Back then, I thought it was beautiful, his way of honoring family. Daniela was quiet, polite, almost too careful around me. She cleaned obsessively and always looked surprised when I walked into a room, like she expected someone else. But I was too in love to notice. One morning, I found Daniela curled up on our couch wearing my favorite robe, the blue silk one Daniel gave me for our anniversary. She looked half asleep, legs tucked under her, sipping from his mug. Daniel walked in behind me, shirtless, and laughed it off with that cloying charm that always made me second. Guess my instincts. She gets cold easily, he said, pulling me close like nothing was off. I smiled back, even as something in my stomach twisted. I told myself they were just clothes, that I was overthinking. But deep down, something small and scared had already started to crack. I noticed a $6,000 withdrawal I didn't authorize labeled as a home repair. When I asked Daniel, he tilted his head and gave me that cloying charm he used when lying felt like breathing. It's probably a bank error, babe. I'll fix it, he said, brushing it off like lint. Michelle had warned me last week to start checking our accounts, but I'd laughed, said we were fine. That night, I stared at the login screen for an hour, wondering if love meant blind trust or just blindness. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but something didn't add up. When I left work one evening, both of my rear tires were slashed. I stood frozen, clutching my bag, trying not to panic. Stephen from marketing walked by and muttered, "Didn't that girl, Dani, Ella, wait in the lobby for hours last week?" My chest tightened. At home, I told Daniel what happened. He chuckled, rubbing my shoulders with that cloying charm, whispering, "Probably just some random vandal." But the next morning, Daniela avoided my eyes and wore my exact perfume. I asked myself if I was being paranoid, or if she was slowly unraveling everything I thought was mine. While organizing our tax paperwork, I found a loan agreement I'd never signed. Yet it had my name, my signature, even my old address. I froze, the pen stroke looked off. I confronted Daniela, who just smirked and said, "Maybe the printer glitched." Her tone was syrupy, smug. I asked Daniel, but he deflected with that cloying charm again, murmuring, "Let me handle it." That night, I dug through our file cabinet and found documents out of order, pages swapped. A few were missing entirely. I didn't know what they were hiding, but for the first time, I knew they were hiding something. I waited until Daniel got out of the shower, then tossed the forged loan paperwork onto the bed. "Explain this," I said, my voice shaking, but not from fear. He glanced at the papers, then back at me with that cloying charm that used to melt me. "Babe, you must have signed that months ago. You're just stressed." I had copies hidden, time-stamped, printed twice. His jaw clenched. "You went through my files." I didn't blink. I checked the security footage. Daniela accessed the cabinet at 2 a.m. The room fell silent, thick with heat. I was done letting him twist reality. Daniela stormed into the room, barefoot, breathless. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," she said, clutching her stomach. I stared at her hand resting gently over a visible curve. Daniel didn't say a word. My ears rang. "It's his," she added. My legs nearly gave out. The robe she wore was mine, the mug on the dresser his, everything blurred. Daniel finally stepped forward, voice calm and sticky with that same cloying charm. "We were going to tell you after the baby was born. It's complicated." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up my phone and hit record. I drove straight to Daniel's mother's house, the wedding ring he gave me still burning on my finger. She opened the door slowly, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. I warned him this would destroy everything, she whispered, leading me inside. I showed her the fake loan papers, the recording, the photos of Daniela in my robe. She didn't flinch. "He's been off since they were kids," she said. I thought it was just overprotection. She pulled off her own wedding ring and placed it on the table between us. "Take it back, that loyalty was a lie." That night, I went back home alone. The walls felt like strangers, the air heavier than grief. I walked from room to room with my phone flashlight, noting every drawer Daniela had rifled through, every photo she'd turned face down. Then I unscrewed the smoke detectors and replaced them with mini cameras. One in the living room, one in the hallway, one in our bedroom. If they wanted war, I'd go legal. No more crying, no more second guessing. I deleted every shared password, backed up everything. The house wasn't mine anymore, but it would be my courtroom now. While cleaning out the guest bedroom, Daniela's old space, I found a spiral, bound diary jammed behind the dresser. It was stained, the pages warped like they'd been hidden for years. I flipped it open and froze. Page after page of Daniela's handwriting, recounting nights she couldn't sleep unless Daniel came in. How he said this was how siblings showed trust. My stomach turned. I'd seen that same phrasing on a note he once left me. Same handwriting, same manipulation. There was even a Polaroid taped in. Daniel, shirtless, Daniela curled under his arm. That was my bed, my robe, my nightmare. I flipped to a page marked with a lipstick smudge. It described how Daniel told Daniela, "You're the only one who understands me." Right after slipping her a bracelet engraved with her initials, D.H. That same line verbatim was in the card he gave me on our second anniversary. My fingers trembled. Had anything he ever said to me been real? The diary wasn't a record of abuse alone. It was a love letter, full of pet names, secret codes, and plans. Daniela hadn't been forced. She'd written, "One day she'll be gone and it'll be just us again." I wanted to scream. I scanned every page of Daniela's diary, hands shaking, eyes stinging, but I didn't stop. Each entry was timestamped, labeled by year, with side notes and drawings. This wasn't just a record. It was a chronicle of complicity. When I finished, I zipped the files and uploaded them to a secure drive. Then I texted Christopher, my divorce attorney. "I have something. Prepare for escalation." He replied within minutes, "Bring it in tomorrow. No one else sees it." I hid the original diary under the floorboard, right beneath Daniel's closet. If he ever came looking, he'd find the ghost of his own filth. I met Michelle in the back booth of our old diner, the one we used to visit before everything got complicated. I slid the USB across the table. "It's all in there," I whispered. Her eyes scanned the files in silence, then locked onto mine. "I believe you, and I've got your back." It was the first time in weeks someone looked at me without suspicion or pity. We made a plan. She'd store a backup at her place, completely offline. If Daniel tried to destroy anything, we'd still have proof. For the first time, the paranoia began to lift. I dug through our bank statements again, line by line this time. That's when I noticed a recurring transfer labeled DHL Services, a name Daniel once joked stood for Daniel Helps Loved Ones. It was a shell account. I traced it to a routing number linked to a debit card in Daniela's name. The withdrawals matched dates we had fights. Each transfer looked like hush money. I didn't cry. I documented everything, screenshot after screenshot. The rage didn't explode. It calcified. He wasn't just betraying me emotionally. He was laundering our life into silence, one transfer at a time. Stephen pulled me aside after a meeting. "You need to see this," he whispered, showing me footage from the employee break room camera. Daniela, weeks ago, lurking near my locker, snapping photos of my schedule. I hadn't noticed her that day, but the timestamp matched the morning my tires were slashed. "She doesn't even work here," Stephen added. My throat tightened. Had Daniel sent her? Was she keeping tabs on when I'd be alone? I backed up the footage, thanked Stephen, and locked my office door for the first time ever. If they were watching, they'd now see me fighting back. Daniel showed up outside my workplace, eyes bloodshot, voice cracking. "Can we just talk?" he begged. I stood still. He dropped to a crouch, clutching his head. "She's pregnant, and this stress, it's hurting the baby." Then he looked up, using that same cloying charm I'd once mistaken for sincerity. "You are my sanity. Don't let this destroy all of us." My jaw tightened. I didn't speak. I watched his performance like a stranger studying an old role. The tears didn't reach his eyes. Only fear did, not of losing me, but of losing control, and I wasn't his to control anymore. He followed me to the elevator lobby, still playing the remorseful husband. "We can fix this," he said, voice velvet, thick with that cloying charm. "Let me explain." Stephen was nearby. I turned, loud enough for him to hear. "You want to explain the diary, the forged documents, or the pregnancy you hid with your sister?" Daniel's face went white. Stephen froze. "Dude, what the hell?" he muttered. Daniel tried to laugh it off, but the charm cracked, exposed like a cheap veneer. I didn't flinch. I hit the elevator button and stared straight ahead. Let him squirm in silence for once. By lunchtime, 2 coworkers had asked if I was doing okay. One said Daniel told them I'd been unstable, since a miscarriage that never happened. My chest tightened. He was spreading lies, twisting sympathy into poison. Classic Daniel. If he couldn't control me directly, he'd discredit me from the shadows. I emailed HR, copying in Stephen, for documentation. I wrote, attaching a summary of the events and footage. Then I booked a session with a therapist, not because I believed I was unwell, but because I refused to let his version of me become the only one anyone saw. That night, I uploaded a private video to a cloud link. Scans of the diary, audio from our confrontation, photos of the forged documents. Then I posted a single sentence on my personal page. "If anything happens to me, this is why." No names. No drama, just truth waiting to explode. Within an hour, Michelle shared it. Then Stephen, then Christopher. I didn't watch the views climb. I just turned off my phone and lay in bed, not as a victim, but as a witness reclaiming control. If silence had protected them all these years, exposure would be my justice. By morning, Daniel's polished image began to crack. A former intern commented on the post anonymously. "He told me the same things in college. I thought I was the only one." The thread exploded. Instead of denying, Daniel texted me, "You have no idea what you've done." No charm this time, no soft manipulation. Just menace. I didn't respond. I forwarded the message to Christopher. Let him threaten himself. The lawyer replied. The mask Daniel wore for years, the grieving brother, the doting husband, was disintegrating, and he knew it. His silence used to scare me. Now his noise did. Christopher called. "We're filing today. Civil harassment and financial fraud. I'll attach excerpts from the diary and evidence chain." My pulse quickened. This wasn't just screenshots anymore. It was formal, legal, real. He'd already drafted restraining orders and flagged joint assets. "We'll freeze access within 48 hours, he added. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place I'd once signed birthday cards with Daniel. Now I was signing affidavits against him. The diary sat beside me, still warped, still damning. I touched its cover and whispered, "You're not just paper, you're freedom." Then I signed my name like I meant it. I got an email from the court, a countersuit. Daniela had filed a harassment claim against me. She claimed I'd stolen her personal diary, fabricated financial records, and threatened her pregnancy. Attached were doctored screenshots of our bank account, edited to show her name as the primary holder. I stared at the email, heart hammering, not out of fear, but fury. She was playing victim, twisting truth into defense. I called Christopher, expected it. He said calmly, "She's cornered, this is noise." But it wasn't just noise, it was an attack. And this time, I'd hit back with receipts and reality. Christopher called the next morning. Her screenshots, we pulled metadata, all generated from your laptop's IP after you changed the password. He laughed dryly, "She's toast." I forwarded additional login logs showing Daniela accessing my emails at 2:14 a.m., 3 nights before the diary was discovered. The timestamps matched the footage I'd saved her sneaking into the study while I slept. We compiled everything into a digital chain of custody. This wasn't drama anymore, it was prosecution. I stared at my screen, breath steady. She hadn't just lied. She'd documented her own downfall, and I was done giving second chances. In his official response to the court, Daniel claimed that the forged loan documents and surveillance footage were orchestrated by his mother. She never approved of our marriage, he wrote. She wanted to protect the family legacy. I stared at the statement, mouth dry. The same man who gave me her wedding ring, who said she's the strongest woman I know, now threw her under the bus to save himself. She called me that night, voice shaking. "He's never been mine," she whispered. I finally understood. He hadn't just betrayed me or Daniela. He'd betrayed the one person who made him human. Daniela didn't cry in court. She didn't deny it either. When the judge asked if the diary entries were hers, she simply said, yes, every word. No emotion. No apology, just bone, deep finality. He said we were different, that the world wouldn't understand. Her voice was clear, detached, like she was describing a dream she didn't want to wake from. I watched from the gallery, frozen. She wasn't delusional. She'd made peace with the perversion. That was the horror. Not just what they did, but that she believed it meant something. And in that moment, I stopped trying to understand either of them. By the weekend, the hashtags were trending. #sibling silence, #Daniela diaries. Clips from the hearing went viral, especially the part where Daniela admitted everything without flinching. Old classmates posted stories. Former co-workers shared red flags. It was like the internet had been holding its breath, waiting for permission to speak. I didn't comment. I didn't repost. I wasn't out for blood. I just wanted distance, but in the flood of outrage, something quiet emerged. Messages from women saying, "Thank you for not staying silent." That was enough. I hadn't planned to start a movement. I only wanted to end a nightmare, but truth travels fast. She stood outside the courthouse, grey scarf fluttering, reporters circling. Daniel's mother faced the cameras without notes. I love them both. I raised them both. But what they did is not love. It's rot. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small box. Inside was the wedding ring. Hers, the one Daniel had once used to propose to me. "I take back everything this symbol was supposed to mean," she said, her voice breaking. "They are no longer mine." I watched from afar, chest tight. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered through the final silence of a mother. I opened a blank document and titled it, "Things I Wasn't Supposed to Say." Line by line, I wrote not about them, but about me. What it felt like to sleep next to betrayal, to confuse gaslighting with affection, to carry someone else's secrets like they were mine. The diary had spoken for Daniela. Now I needed something that spoke for me, not evidence, not defense. Just truth, raw, unpolished, and mine. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it, but writing it made one thing clear. I wasn't just surviving their story anymore. I was finally writing my own. The last message he sent read, "One day you'll realize we were both victims." I didn't reply. I just stared at the contact name, Daniel Emergency. I had never changed it. Maybe part of me still thought he'd come through, that I'd need him someday. I tapped edit, then delete contact. My screen went blank where his name used to be. No more calls. No more what ifs, just space. Space I could finally breathe in. I whispered to myself, "I'm not yours, not anymore." And for the first time in years, my phone was silent, and it felt like peace. The house was quiet in a way I didn't recognize, not haunted, not hostile, just still. I wandered from room to room, barefoot, unsure of what to do with the silence. No more whispered lies, no doors half closed, no footsteps I braced against. I opened the windows, let the air move. I picked up an old throw blanket Ella used to cling to and tossed it in the trash. One by one, I cleared drawers, not with anger, but intention. I wasn't erasing memories, I was making space. The house wasn't evidence anymore. It was mine, and it was finally breathing with me. I sat on the floor of the empty guest room, Daniela's old space. The sunlight hit the wall in a way it never had before. I leaned back against the drywall, knees to my chest, and waited for the ache to come, and it did. But it didn't drown me. It sat beside me like an old scar finally acknowledged. I whispered, "You didn't imagine it. You didn't make it worse. You survived it." The silence didn't argue. For the first time it agreed, and I realized healing wasn't loud. Sometimes it was just letting the hurt sit without begging it to leave. I stood in front of my bookshelf, half empty, scattered. Most of the titles reminded me of him. Books he gifted, books he pretended to read, underlined passages that now felt manipulative. I started pulling them down, one by one, not in anger but in clarity. What did I believe in when I wasn't being watched? What voice was mine when I wasn't echoing someone else's? I kept the ones that felt like me, ones I'd highlighted for myself. I stacked the rest in a donation box, let someone else rewrite their meaning. I was done letting others narrate my life. I wiped the bathroom mirror with a damp cloth, smearing away weeks of dust and old steam marks. My reflection stared back, tired, yes, but whole. There were lines on my face I hadn't noticed before, and eyes that didn't dart away like they used to. "You believed him," I said softly, "and you still survived." My voice didn't tremble, I didn't flinch. The woman in the mirror didn't look ruined, she looked awake. I pressed my palm to the glass, not for comfort, but for confirmation. I was still here, not broken, not erased, just standing, and finally, facing forward, I bought a snake plant. Not for aesthetics, not for air purification, just because I wanted something alive in the house that hadn't lied to me. I placed it near the living room window, in the exact spot where Daniel once staged his perfect family photos. The soil smelled clean, my hands got dirty, and I didn't mind. I watered it gently, no overcompensation. It didn't need rescuing, just sunlight and space like me. I didn't say anything profound, no vow, no mantra. Just a breath, and for the first time, the silence in the room didn't echo pain. It held peace. The court ruling came on a Thursday. Christopher called, voice steady. The house is yours, full ownership, and the joint accounts have been frozen pending full audit. I nodded, even though no one could see. And the divorce, I asked, finalized. That word hit harder than I expected, not with grief, but with gravity. I walked through the house that afternoon, keys in hand, alone but not lonely. Every floorboard still creaked the same, but now it was on my terms. I stood at the threshold, whispered, mine again, and not as a possession, but as proof that I had returned to myself. I reopened my inbox for the first time in weeks. Over 300 unread messages stared back, a cluttered archive of chaos, lawyers, reporters, distant relatives, even strangers. I didn't panic, I brewed tea, then I started deleting, not out of rage but precision. The ones I needed, I starred. The ones meant to shame or pity, I erased. Each swipe felt like cutting a thread I never asked to be tied into. I didn't need everyone's opinion. I needed my own voice to be louder than theirs, and as the inbox cleared, so did the noise in my head. Nancy waited outside the cafe with 2 drinks black coffee for her, chai for me. She remembered. You don't have to talk, she said as I sat down. Just sip. We sat in silence for a while, watching cars pass and clouds move like they had somewhere better to be. I glanced at her hands, steady, open, not reaching to fix me, just present. I'm not who I was, I whispered. She smiled. Good, that means you grew. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch, I just smiled back. Maybe I wasn't ready for love. But I was ready for real company again. I painted the living room, not beige like before. Soft sage green, quiet, alive, nothing like him. Each stroke covered old nail holes, old shadows. I didn't hire anyone. I wanted the ache in my arms, the sweat in my collar. I wanted to claim the walls with effort, not escape. The music I played while working was mine. The playlist, the tempo, the lyrics. Nothing borrowed, nothing staged. By evening, the room smelled like change, fresh and full. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, watching paint dry and sunlight shift. And for once, the walls didn't echo, they absorbed. Nancy came over with takeout and socks. Warm feet make better decisions, she said, tossing me a pair. We ate on the floor of my newly painted living room, surrounded by drop cloths and half-finished thoughts. No questions, no pressure, just the sound of real laughter filling walls that had held too many silences. When she got up to leave, I asked, you want to stay a while? She didn't nod. She just took off her shoes and curled up on the couch like she'd always belonged. And maybe she had, not in the story that broke me, but in the one I was writing now.